Welcome, I'm Catherine Hadro, and this is EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Abortion at the High Court. The Supreme Court took up a Louisiana pro-life law this week. We speak with Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry and the Solicitor General who defended the law. A judicial legacy. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tells us why the pro-life movement should pay attention to the judges he's confirming to the court system. Keeping vigil. We show you how the pro-life movement maintained a peaceful and prayerful presence on Supreme Court steps leading up to the major abortion case. The Supreme Court this week heard its first major abortion case with both Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh on the bench. The case was June Medical Services versus Russo. It centers around a Louisiana law requiring abortionists have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the facility. This is the same standard that medical clinics throughout the state already meet. In the Supreme Court hearing, Justice Samuel Alito was by far the most vocal justice to push back on the abortion facilities case, highlighting the potential conflict of interest. Justice Kavanaugh also pressed June Medical Services on whether it considers all admitting privileges to be burdensome and unconstitutional. The ruling is expected in June. Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are President Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominees. They were sworn in following Senate confirmation battles, which were led by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Joining us now is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Senator, the Supreme Court picked up a major abortion case this session on whether Louisiana abortion centers must maintain the same safety and health standards as other surgical centers. Can you speak to how important it is to have strong constitutionalist justices as the High Court considers cases like this one?
Well, we hope for the best outcome. Obviously, predicting the Supreme Court decisions is pretty hazardous. I can tell you what we've been doing here in the Senate. We had two votes recently, abortion-related votes. One, the pain-capable bill, and the other, the Born Alive Survivors bill, which you could argue was really not an abortion vote because in that scenario, the baby would have survived a botched abortion and certainly be outside the womb at that point. Stunning that we couldn't get 60 votes for that one or for the pain-capable bill. So I think we still have a roadblock here in the Senate. In fact, it seems to me the Democrats are actually heading in the wrong direction because they've now backed away from the Hyde Amendment, which your viewers may remember was boilerplate language and bills for 30 years preventing federal tax money being used to pay for abortions. It used to be both Democrats and Republicans would support that language. They've now pulled back from that. So as the public becomes more and more pro-life, it seems that our Democratic colleagues have become less and less inclined in that direction.
Senator, in listening to the past 10 Democratic presidential debates now, it sometimes seems to me your name comes up even more often than President Trump's name. What do you make of this vitriol towards you, and does it boil down ultimately to the abortion issue and the possibility the Supreme Court could chip away at Roe v. Wade?
I think the reason the Democrats are agitated, shall I say, about me is because I won't take up the bills that they're passing in the House, all that are very, very far left. They would not pass the Senate. We're not going to waste our time on trying to turn America into a socialist country. That's not what we were sent here to do. So they view me as a roadblock. Frankly, I'm proud of stopping those bills. My colleagues are proud of stopping those bills. We're not going to turn America into a socialist country by picking up the House agenda and passing it.
As you mentioned, you scheduled a vote on both the Born Alive bill and the pain-capable bill. Neither reached the necessary 60 votes. What was your intent in scheduling these bills for a vote?
Well, I thought the American people needed to know, particularly in an election year, where their representatives stand on these important pro-life bills. And without a vote, many of those people who oppose the measures wouldn't have to explain it. I thought it was important for the American people to know where each of us stood on these important pro-life bills.
In your Senate floor speech ahead of the Born Alive and pain-capable votes, you said the senators would be able to take a, quote, clear moral stand. We see where that ended. These bills were both blocked. Senator, where are we in history when it comes to our nation's morals on the sanctity of life?
You know what I think? I think public opinion is moving in the direction of the pro-life movement, but unfortunately, here in the Congress, the Democrats seem to be moving in the opposite direction. I think there's a major disconnect between the majority of Americans on these pro-life issues and today's Democratic Party. Very different from the Democratic Party just a few years ago, in which there was frequently a number of pro-life voters.
Are there other upcoming opportunities in the Senate to advance pro-life legislation?
We'll be looking for any opportunity to do that. It's pretty clear that we have obstacles here in the Senate, not to mention the House of Representatives, which obviously wouldn't pass either of the bills that we've been discussing.
Finally, the Senate has confirmed over 100 federal court judges under your leadership. You are obviously making a stamp on history when it comes to the judiciary. Why is this important for pro-life cases making their way through the lower court system?
Yeah, these are lifetime appointments. The men and women we put in place, 2 on the Supreme Court, 51 circuit judges, which is 1 out of every 4 circuit judges in America have been installed in the last 3 years, are what we call strict constructionists. In other words, they don't try to pass legislation. That's what you do in Congress. They try to interpret the law. And I think pro-life voters should be more comfortable with judges who believe that their responsibility is to follow the Constitution and to follow the law. And that's why there's so much enthusiasm among America's pro-life voters over the people that President Trump has nominated and the people that we've confirmed. My role in it is to determine how quickly they get confirmed. We've done 51 in a little over 3 years. President Obama did 55 in 8 years. Clearly, it's my top priority, a big priority of the administration, and the way to have the longest lasting impact on the country is with men and women who serve for a lifetime.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Joining us now is Marilyn Musgrave. She is a former U.S. representative for the state of Colorado and today is the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Susan B. Anthony list. Thanks for being back here.
Happy to be here.
Congresswoman, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tells us it's his top priority to confirm judges. What are the implications of this for the pro-life movement?
Well, it's a great time to be pro-life when we see the court shifting. I am so grateful to Leader McConnell for doing exactly what he said he would do when he was minority leader. He said that he would do exactly this, and under President Trump, the Senate has confirmed over 1/4 of the federal judiciary. Those are Trump appointees. It's amazing. It changes everything for the pro-life movement.
This week's Supreme Court case, June Medical Services versus Russo, is the first abortion case with both Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh on the bench. Both were nominated by President Trump and confirmed by Senator McConnell. Do Gorsuch and Kavanaugh share the same judicial philosophy, and what could that mean for this case?
Well, it appears that they do. They're human beings, so we can't predict exactly what they'll do, but Gorsuch has shown himself to be a strict constitutionalist. When you look at Brett Kavanaugh's record, he's independent, he's fair. So I have hope of a very good outcome. It was incredible to be before the Supreme Court yesterday, Catherine, and to be seeing both sides as how they feel about protecting women when they go in for a medical procedure, about health and safety standards. Amazing.
Congresswoman, there was a line that stood out to me from the oral arguments yesterday, and it's when Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg asked Louisiana, quote, "You don't dispute that among medical procedures, first trimester abortion is among the safest, far safer than childbirth." Congresswoman,
Wow.
Yeah, can you address that?
It really sets you back to hear that kind of comment. That study was done. that she's referring to, although she's mixed a couple of things, in 2012, and it was done by a doctor who, of course, had a vested interest in the outcome, saying that abortion was safer than childbirth because he was an abortionist. And you know what? In 2012, we weren't looking at chemical abortion like we are now, where a woman is given medication and goes home to have an abortion alone when she could deliver her baby. It's an amazing time. But you know what? How about the safety of the baby? How about that? We know that abortion results in a dead child. So I'm taken aback. You think of the joys of pregnancy and welcoming children into this world, and to compare abortion to childbirth like that is unnerving. And not only that, a case is being heard about women who choose a procedure that I don't agree with, but shouldn't they have health and safety standards?
Well,
a doctor that has admitting privileges that performs the abortions, it's jaw-dropping.
That is my next question. This case at the Supreme Court this week centers around whether abortion facilities need to maintain the same safety and health standards as other surgical centers. Can you speak to why that is important?
Well, it's so important. I talked to one of my friends who's a doctor, and he said any time procedures are performed, things will go wrong. You can count on it. And women deserve access to a blood bank and anesthesiologists. They need to, doctors treating them need to know what they've just gone through. So it's amazing to me that people don't understand that we are pro-life and we are pro-woman. We think women deserve better. When you think of Kermit Gosnell, James Pendergraft, when you think of Ulrich Klopler, I mean, think of that. What happened to those women in those facilities? It's a nightmare.
This should be something we all agree on.
Yes.
Congresswoman Marilyn Musgrave with the Susan B. Anthony list. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
The Senate voted last week on the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. The legislation would ban abortion after 5 months of pregnancy. That is when science indicates an unborn child can feel pain. And while the majority of senators did vote in support of the legislation, it still failed to reach the 60-vote threshold necessary to break a Democratic filibuster. It's important we let our pro-life senators know we are grateful for their important vote for this common sense bill. We need to send a message of support for this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to thank your senator for voting for the pain-capable bill. Once you get to ProLifeWeekly.com and type in your information, our website will let you know whether your senator voted for the pain-capable bill. If your senator did, you can then send a thank you directly to your senator's inbox. Our nation's senators need to hear the pro-life movement's support for the pain-capable bill. Contact your senator at ProLifeWeekly.com. With all eyes on Louisiana's pro-life law this week, we now speak with two people instrumental in defending it. Joining us in studio is Jeff Landry, the Attorney General for Louisiana, and Liz Murrill, the Solicitor General for Louisiana, who defended the state's pro-life law in the Supreme Court just yesterday. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Delighted to be here.
Liz, I was in oral arguments yesterday, and you began your defense by explaining that Louisiana law is justified because of life-threatening safety violations, malpractice, testimony from post-abortive women, among other reasons. What was the main point you wanted to get across to the High Court?
I think just very simply and quickly up front that we had a very robust legislative record to support our law and that it was fully justified. And so that may have been the only time that I was going to be able to get that point out. So that was the main reason I said that at that time.
Jeff, the plaintiff, the abortion provider, argues the Louisiana law is, quote, identical to the Texas law. That's a reference to the Texas law struck down by the Supreme Court in Hellerstedt 4 years ago. Is that true?
No, and unfortunately, the mainstream media out there is repeating exactly what the plaintiff's saying, which is absolutely a lie. It's why it's such a pleasure to be here with you all. It's what makes this network such a great network, because it's a network of truth, right? And so it's not. It's absolutely not. Texas's law and Louisiana's law, the cases are as different as an apple and an orange. In Louisiana, in Texas, let's start with Texas. Texas went out and specified and said abortion clinics have to have admitting privileges. Clinics similar to abortion clinics, right? did not necessarily have to have admitting privileges. Also, Texas's law was a criminal law. Big difference. Take Louisiana. Louisiana basically took abortion clinics and folded them into our regulatory scheme. So clinics similar to abortion clinics, clinics where like Liz says, ambulatory clinics, where people were mildly sedated, where there are invasive procedures going on, those doctors already were required to have admitting privileges. And so we just said abortion clinics were kind of sitting out there in no man's land, and we just took them into our regulatory fold.
There was a really interesting debate that quickly rose in the hearing yesterday surrounding third parties standing in a conflict of interest. Because this lawsuit was not brought on by a Louisiana woman, it was brought on by an abortion facility. Can you break this argument down for us?
Liz, why don't you take it first?
So for some time now, for probably, I think since about 1993, actually about 1976, there's been a practice where the clinics and the doctors will sue, and women aren't, and I mean, it used to be before that when Roe and Doe and some of these other cases were filed in the 70s, these were cases were all brought by women and sometimes minors to challenge these laws. There might have been a doctor and a clinic, they were bringing them together. That doesn't happen anymore. It's only clinics and doctors that are bringing these challenges, and I think it's just fundamentally in conflict with the interests of the people who are protected by health and safety regulations. If you think about like a seatbelt law, we wouldn't let Ford Motor Company challenge a seatbelt law or an airbag law in the name of the people who are protected by that airbag. So it's just a conflict, I think, in the regulatory structure. These are health and safety regulations, and they have an interest in being deregulated or having less oversight. And women who go to these clinics, and even if we would hope that they don't go there or don't make that choice, we want them to be safe if they do, and they have a different interest once they're in a clinic.
And you highlighted how one Louisiana doctor hired a radiologist to commit an abortion. Why is this important for our viewers to know?
Well, again, I mean, it goes back to common sense safety, right? Patient safety. You want to know that when you walk into a particular clinic as a patient to undergo a medical procedure, that the doctors are competent in the procedure that they're going to be performing on you. And that's the purpose of admitting privileges is twofold: competency, credentials, and also, of course, if something does go wrong, you want a smooth transition between the patient in the clinic and the hospital where there may be a life or death situation that has arisen.
And one of the arguments that the other side has made is, well, and it was kind of picked up in the Texas case too, where they're just saying that, well, licensing does that, but licensing doesn't do that. Licensing doesn't credential you for a procedure. It just makes sure that your basic license is a good medical license, but it doesn't say what you're qualified to do. And so these create, I mean, the hospitals do that. They credential you for the procedure that you're doing. And what we were able to demonstrate in our record at trial is that just simply was not happening. To your point about the radiologist and the ophthalmologist, they were hiring people to do abortions who were not qualified to do that. Even under other rules that apply to all doctors in Louisiana, they were not qualified.
Well, it would be like you going and let's say you had a hernia. Would you let a radiologist repair your hernia, or would you go to a surgeon?
I'm so grateful that you highlighted that point. And this was the first time we heard Justice Kavanaugh speak in a Supreme Court abortion case. And he posed this question to the plaintiff, asking in part, quote, "Are you saying that admitting privileges laws are always unconstitutional?" Why is this question so important, and what does it reveal about Justice Kavanaugh's line of thinking right now?
I mean, I think a question like that is just, and I don't want to predict what Justice Kavanaugh was thinking, but a question like that generally is testing the limits of their logic. how far does your argument go? Do you think admitting privileges have no value whatsoever for any reason, under any purpose, under any circumstances? And it matters in our case because we actually have a generally applicable rule, not just to abortion providers, where ambulatory surgery center medical staff have to have admitting privileges. It's also built into our office practice regulations for office-based surgery. So, when you have a generally applicable rule, and other doctors have to comply with it. Now all we're saying is, well, we just think you should be subject to the same rule, and we shouldn't have special rules for that. They shouldn't be given like a special exemption from the rules that we're applying to other doctors in our state. And so I think that kind of question tests the limit of their argument. Are they constitutional? Do they have value and benefit sometimes under any circumstances? And I think that they just simply are in a position where they had to say no, they don't think they do under any at all.
Well, an interesting part really in Cavanaugh's question, I loved it because he was going down the right road. I mean, think about it. I looked at it in the context of not just is admitting privileges, do they serve any value in dealing with abortion clinics, but is there a value in admitting privileges? So again, there's an absolute value. I'd heard a story not too long ago where private insurance companies now are requiring doctors who are performing certain smaller procedures in their offices, requiring those doctors to have basic admitting privileges. So admitting privileges serves as a safety function. We know that. And so it was an interesting part. I'd like to have seen it go on a little further.
I think the point is that it reduces risk. I mean, we have so many different types of regulations, especially in the medical field. They are intended to reduce risk. We don't just, we don't just have mechanisms to protect people on the back end when you've had something go wrong. We want to stop that from happening on the front end, and privileging does that by making sure that doctors are qualified for that procedure.
And we'll just have to see what the ruling is in June. So grateful to have you both here. Instrumental in this case, Jeff Landry, Louisiana Attorney General, Liz Murrill, Louisiana Solicitor General. Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Coming up, the New York Times editorial board calls the pro-life law at the center of the Supreme Court case a, quote, absurd argument. We respond to the blatantly pro-abortion argument weaved into the mainstream media narrative when we return. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. The New York Times editorial board weighed in against Louisiana's pro-life law facing the Supreme Court this week. That is our Speak Out segment. The New York Times editorial board, which describes itself as a group of opinion journalists whose views are informed by expertise and debate, argue that Louisiana's pro-life law is, quote, medically unnecessary and burdensome. The editorial accused Louisiana of pushing a pro-life agenda, and I quote again, under the guise of efforts to protect women's health. Take a look at this part of the editorial piece. The New York Times dismisses the notion abortion facilities should have to meet basic medical standards, writing, quote, it's a confounding rationale. People are generally made safer with more access to health care, not less. And abortion in particular is one of the safest medical procedures there is. The New York Times also said Louisiana's pro-life law is a, quote, absurd argument. It's often pro-abortion advocates who depict the pro-life movement as only caring about babies and forgetting about women. But this pro-life Louisiana law specifically does look out for the health and safety of women. To say this law is an absurd argument is an attack on the well-being of women. The New York Times, being America's flagship newspaper, carries a huge responsibility of journalistic integrity. And yet this opinion piece by the Times editorial board is so blatantly pro-abortion, even using abortion groups' talking points. This editorial piece is a dismissal of pro-life views of law and a true disservice to the women of Louisiana. This week was a contentious one. The abortion debate is always high energy on both sides, and when you put that in a high-stakes case at the high court, the tension between both sides is palpable. But the pro-life movement is truly the movement of peace and prayer. So for this week's Pro-Life Focus, we want to highlight the peaceful presence on the Supreme Court steps before the abortion debate took place inside. Students for Life of America held a prayer vigil and then an all-night vigil outside the Supreme Court from Tuesday evening to Wednesday morning. Despite even some rain, pro-lifers came out to pray before the Supreme Court justices heard this very important case. Pro-life leaders shared words of prayer and encouragement, including from the very woman who wrote the pro-life law at the center of the Supreme Court case, Democrat Louisiana State Senator Katrina Jackson. Listen to what Jackson had to say.
Our victory was proclaimed on the cross. So we have no question about what's happening tomorrow. Because when you stand and advocate for God, He stands and advocates for you. Amen. I thank you all for standing with us, because standing with us is protecting women and the unborn.
How powerful that it was prayer that paved the way for the Supreme Court hearing. This week, I was able to be inside the Supreme Court as a member of the press to hear the oral arguments. I was in the court when the justices heard this pivotal abortion case. There was definitely tense back and forth between the justices and the lawyers, but it was in stepping outside of the Supreme Court and walking around the rally with all the protesters and advocates that the difference between our movements was stark. Abortion advocates were shouting out vulgar language and music, even shouting out threats. But the pro-life movement demonstrated a truly pro-woman, compassionate approach. Sometimes when you watch the abortion debate unfold in person in real time, it can seem daunting, like we'll never be able to convert all hearts and minds. But I'm convinced that peaceful and prayerful encounters can change this culture, even if it is one person at a time. So thank you to Students for Life of America for hosting that prayerful vigil, and for all our pro-life viewers who I'm sure were busy praying for this cause at home. It's that very love and peace that can communicate more loudly than any bullhorn. That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. We would love to hear from you with your thoughts on this week's show or even story ideas. You are a big part of this program, so let's connect online. Find us on social media at EWTN Pro-Life, and you can always send us an email at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. Until next week, remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.